Hello and welcome to 3 Minute Gaming. I'm Nathan, and today I'm going to tell you if this game's worth your time and bandwidth. Today's game is The Last Faith. The Metroidvania with Souls elements genre is pretty packed, but newcomer The Lost Faith is hoping to make a splash. Does it do enough to merit checking out? Let's find out. The Last Faith is a Kickstarter Metroidvania Souls game that draws a lot of inspiration from Blasphemous, but really it feels like a best of when it comes to gameplay stylings from all across the genre. The story is, well, it's not very good, frankly. It's aiming for a dark, Bloodborne / Dark Souls-esque world, and while it nails the aesthetic, the writing itself is tedious and unengaging, paired with some questionable voice acting. Which is fine because what you're here for is the game's exploration and combat. Last Faith, as mentioned, feels a lot like other 2D Souls games of the genre, though this one leans a little more into the Castlevania style feel, unlike say Salt and Sanctuary. You'll be exploring multiple zones with enemies, traps, and platforming, all interconnected, and unlocking shortcuts as you go along. You'll also be lighting bonfires that act as fast travel points. Almost all upgrades are platform related, though you'll find a handful of weapons along the way. You'll have your melee weapon, which has only one attack button, but can be charged as well as execute a weapon-specific attack that uses focus. There's no stamina in this game, just focus, which is used for your magic and abilities, and your magic kind of functions like sub-weapons in Castlevania. You can also equip guns that use ammunition instead of focus, and all of these builds have different stat associations and weapons that scale appropriately. Like Souls games, killing enemies gives you XP, which you lose on death and have to recover. These souls can be funneled into stat raising or upgrading gear in a somewhat Tight Knight-esque system. You also need to find and send NPCs back to your hub in order to have access to shops, blacksmiths, and so on, kind of similar to Majula from Dark Souls 2. Should be mentioned that, with a few exceptions, this game's difficulty skews towards an easier Souls-inspired game. Think Blasphemous 2 rather than 1. Most platforming is fairly forgiving minus some instant kill spikes, and enemies generally have clear tells that you can easily learn to defeat them. And I really don't have much more to say about Last Faith because you've probably played this kind of game before multiple times. It's Metroidvania but with a new trend of tossing Souls elements in, with a focus on its moody atmosphere, large map and exploration, and lots of bosses. So what do I like about Last Faith? Well, despite some issues that I'll get into, I found the game very engaging to play, particularly against the large bosses. The loop worked really well for me as I felt I was constantly progressing and getting stronger, and as mentioned, the difficulty is challenging but not overly unfair. Additionally, this game really looks great. While it may derive too much of its atmosphere inspiration from Blasphemous, the pixel art and animations are fantastic, and there's some really gorgeous landscapes and backgrounds here. And last, the level design is pretty solid. It also does a great job divvying out exploration upgrades at a solid clip, encouraging revisiting zones to find the secrets you couldn't get before, though I do wish you did get double jump a little earlier. When it comes to the bad, this game has a ton of minor issues that hamper its experience. Weapon upgrades cost too much, status effects last way too long, hitboxes are a little wonky, your map doesn't show anything particularly useful besides locked doors, you have to farm healing consumables, no new game plus, and so on. Individually, these aren't too bad, but they add up to make the game feel very unpolished. And speaking of unpolished, this game's balance is all over the place. Spell builds feel handicapped because focus doesn't auto-regenerate, and strength gets its best sword early while other builds don't get their weapons until later. Plus, there's a massive difficulty spike in the Burned Apostle boss that makes Rom from Bloodborne look like a speed bump. And lastly, I found this game has some bizarre control issues. A lot of actions felt more delayed than they should, and you can't cast spells or use ranged weapons in the air for some reason, and can't attack while ducking. You do get used to it, but all these things make controlling the game feel limited compared to other games in the genre. As you know, I rate games on a 3-point scale, must play, maybe consider, and don't bother. And The Last Faith is a very good Metroidvania that has too many minor issues for it to be considered great. That being said, the good news is most of these issues are things that can be hotfixed, much like the original release of Blasphemous, and so if you really love this genre, you'll probably still like The Last Faith in its current, albeit rough state. However, if you're mixed on these kinds of games, you should definitely wait until they polish it up a bit before giving it a look. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. If you played The Last Faith, what do you think about it? Apparently in the Metroidvania community, it's been a bit of a controversy, but I want to know what you think, so please let me know in the comments. And regardless, go out there and maybe give this game a look once it's had a couple patches.